Welcome back to Rhombus Gaming. We're going to be taking a break from our box to board series and launching into something called Maximum Effort, in which I put my amateur painting skills to the test and try to take on a new or exciting model for the fun of it. So I'm starting with Bayard's Revenge, which is a version of the Emperor's Champion that came out last year. Took a few months for me to get my copy, but once I did, I got right into it, and from the get-go I knew I wanted to do a conversion on this model. It's a really cool sculpt, but I thought it would be neat to take this as a Crimson Fist with a Thunder Hammer. It's a monopose model, so I did have to do some slicing and dicing to get this to work, but I went into my bits bin and found a couple pieces that I thought would work for this, and I ended up molding it into what I think is a really cool pose for the model. A lot of it's still more or less the original model, but I've gone and put an open hand in, like he's bringing that hammer down, and I think when I put this in Crimson Fist colors, it's going to look really, really cool. So I'm starting off with the orc base. Going to be putting some texture paints on the bottom here ahead of time so that I've got it there for dry brushing. And then I'm matching with Eshin Gray across all of the rocks and other debris underneath the orc here. Now I'm not typically an orc painter myself, but luckily my young assistant from the last video is, and so we had a lot of the paints we needed on hand. I was able to start off by putting a base of orc flesh on all of the exposed parts of the orc, and then I went over those muscles and ridge details with a darker green ink to bring that out. Having already added Rhinox hide to the belts and straps, I started adding lead belcher to the metallic details and the shoulder pads. And then before going in to highlight those, I've progressively dry brushed lighter shades of green onto the skin until I hit an almost yellow mixture to bring out the extreme peaks on the veins and muscle bits and chin that you can see here in detail. I'm adding red to the shoulder pads to make this an Evil Sun's orc. So I started off with a Mephiston red base. I allowed some of the metallic to come through still. And then what I also did is I went over the edges to highlight the extreme peaks with an Evil Sun's red as well. To save time, I've skipped ahead and done a lot of the edge highlighting on things like the belts. I've added things like pants and details across the eyes and teeth. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the orc the way it looks, and we can now move on to the Space Marine. Now, painting a Space Marine is a lot more familiar for me, so this was more or less my usual approach, except a different color. So I'm putting on a thin base of Cantor Blue, and after that I apply a second coat, and when I had that down, I was able to start putting Drakenhof Nightshade in all the recesses to bring out the shadows. And then what I did after that is I dry brushed over with another thinner coat of Cantor Blue, and highlighted some of the edges with a lighter blue. Given that this is a Crimson Fist, obviously I needed to move on to red, so I started off with the tabard, putting a thin coat of Mephiston red that I'll be going over with a second coat later, and of course going over the fists themselves with that same red, as well as all of the other details on things like the epaulets and anywhere else where there might be a need for highlighting on the armor. Before shading the tabard, I actually started off with the belt buckle metallics so that I had that in place when it came time to add my shading. And what I did do there was add some Nuln Oil on both the tabard as well as the buckle to bring out the recesses on those. And then afterwards, I went over the edges of it with a slightly lighter red to bring out the details around the edges of the tabard. From there, I moved on to some of my other finer details. I did all of my metallics by starting off with a base coat of Abaddon Black, and then going over that with a slightly dry brushed coat of Lead Belcher to allow some of the shadows to come through from the black. I did this on the hammer handle, chain, as well as the grenades along the belt. And also on some of the even smaller pieces, like the armor buckles shown here. Now I have to admit that as I progressed through the model, I was a lot more focused on the painting than where my camera was. And looking back, I realized that a lot of the shots I took at this point started to get off-center or off-focus. But I started off by adding Steel Legion Brown to all of the pouches on the belt. I painted the hammer in a Runefang steel and went over that with blue contrast paint. And after that I started to go over some of the banners and other items with the same Mephiston red that I did the armor details on as well. To wrap the model off, I've taken the helmet and applied a coat of that same Mephiston red I've been going to this whole time. Now I can't say that I'm always so diligent that I put my helmets on toothpicks and paint like this, but knowing that I was doing this for the video, I decided to take that approach this time. I then went over some of the recesses with Nuln Oil to bring out the shadows like I had done on the armor. And after that, I went over with a highlight of Mephiston red and then a edge highlight of Evil Sun's Scarlet. With the helmet glued on, I'm more or less done the model. I can always come back to this and add some highlights here and there or change some of the details, but I think I'm pretty happy with it. I hope I did the model justice. You can have a look at some of the action shots I've taken here. This is a really fun model to put together, and even more fun when you can add your own touch to it like I've done here. I will be doing another one of these conversions in the future, so stay tuned for more, and thanks again for watching.